Picture this: a towering beacon of human knowledge, a fortress of scrolls so vast its halls whispered with the wisdom of countless ages. This was the legendary library of Alexandria, a place where the myths of gods, the secrets of civilizations, and the lost histories of the world once lived. But in one fateful blaze, flames devoured more than parchment and ink. They erased entire worlds of understanding, leaving behind only echoes of what might have been. What if I told you that somewhere in those ashes lay secrets so extraordinary, so mythic, they could rewrite everything we thought we knew about the ancient world? Today, we're stepping into the shadows of history to uncover the untold stories that might have once lined those sacred shelves. Ancient Alexandria wasn't just a city, it was a crossroads of magic and science, where scholars and mystics brushed shoulders under the glow of the Mediterranean sun. The library stood as its beating heart, a sanctuary for truths too profound to be forgotten. Yet when fire consumed it, the world lost more than just books. Imagine the weight of those lost tales, forgotten epics of heroes who walked with gods, prophecies scribbled by oracles in trances, maps to realms that defy logic. These weren't mere stories, they were fragments of a reality where myth and history blurred, where the impossible felt tangible. And now we're left to piece together the whispers of what once was. But here's the thrilling part: some secrets refuse to stay buried. Hidden in ancient texts, etched into ruins, or passed down through hushed legends, clues remain. This journey isn't just about mourning what was lost, it's about chasing the ghostly traces of knowledge that slipped through the flames. What if the library held proof of civilizations older than we dare to imagine, or rituals that could summon forces beyond our understanding? Together, we'll sift through the fragments, separating fact from legend, to reveal the most astonishing mythic secrets that might have once called Alexandria home. The truth is waiting, and it's far stranger than fiction. It all began with a vision, a king's dream to create something the world had never seen. Ptolemy I, a general of Alexander the Great and the founder of Egypt's Ptolemaic dynasty, didn't just want a library. He wanted a monument to human brilliance, a sanctuary where every scroll, every idea, every whispered truth from across the known world could find a home. And so, in the heart of Alexandria, a city already shimmering with ambition, the great library rose, a beacon of learning that would draw thinkers like moths to a flame. Picture walking through its halls in its prime towering shelves groaned under the weight of knowledge, holding over 500,000 scrolls painstakingly gathered from Athens to Babylon, from the banks of the Nile to the farthest reaches of Persia. Scholars say its collection was so vast, so meticulously curated, that it included everything from epic poetry to groundbreaking medical treatises, from star charts that mapped the heavens to forbidden texts rumored to hold the secrets of the gods themselves. The library wasn't just a building, it was a living, breathing organism, pulsing with debates, experiments, and discoveries that pushed the boundaries of what humanity believed possible. But the true magic of the library wasn't just in its scrolls, it was in the minds it brought together. Imagine standing in its shadowed corridors, listening to the murmurs of Euclid shaping the foundations of geometry, or Archimedes unraveling the mysteries of the physical world. Philosophers clashed over the nature of existence, astronomers traced the paths of celestial bodies, and physicians dissected the human body in search of cures. This was a place where the sharpest intellects of the age gathered, not just to preserve knowledge but to ignite it, to argue, to test, to prove. The library's genius lay in its chaos, its relentless pursuit of truth. And then there were the scrolls themselves, each one a treasure. The Ptolemies were ruthless in their quest to fill the library's shelves, decreeing that every ship docking in Alexandria's harbor had to surrender its books for copying. Some say they even borrowed the original Olympic scripts from Athens, returning only copies while keeping the priceless originals for themselves. The library became a vault of the world's memory, holding texts that, once lost, would never be recovered. Think of the plays of Sophocles, the histories of Babylon, the scientific observations of cultures now forgotten, all reduced to ashes in an instant. Yet for all its grandeur, the library was always more fragile than it seemed. Its very existence was a defiance against ignorance, against time. And that defiance came at a cost, because when you gather the world's knowledge in one place, you don't just build a sanctuary. You paint a target. The flames that swallowed the Library of Alexandria weren't just a single catastrophic event, they were a slow unraveling, a tragedy woven from misunderstandings and myth. For centuries, the story went that Julius Caesar's siege of Alexandria in 48 BCE sparked the inferno that destroyed the library, his ships burning in the harbor and the fire spreading to its sacred halls. But dig deeper and the truth becomes murkier. Ancient historians like Plutarch and Seneca blamed Caesar, yet their accounts were written decades after the fact, tangled in political agendas. Modern scholars now suspect the fire likely damaged only a portion of the library warehouses near the docks storing scrolls, perhaps, but not the great institution itself. The library's decline wasn't a single dramatic blaze, but a series of blows across centuries. Then came the Christian riots of the 4th century CE, another chapter often blamed for the library's final ruin. Theophilus, the zealous patriarch of Alexandria, is said to have ordered the destruction of the Serapeum, a temple housing a daughter branch of the library, to crush pagan influence. But even here, the evidence is shaky. While Christian mobs certainly vandalized the Serapeum, there's no clear proof its scrolls were the heart of the main library. Some historians argue the Great Library was already a shadow of itself by then, its scrolls scattered or decayed after centuries of neglect. The riot might have been less a killing blow and more a footnote in a longer story of decline. And then there's the most persistent myth of all, the claim that Caliph Omar ordered the libraries burning during the Muslim conquest of Alexandria in the 7th century. The story goes that when asked what to do with the scrolls, Omar allegedly declared, "If they contradict the Quran, they are heresy. If they agree, they are redundant." It's a dramatic tale, but almost certainly a fabrication. The earliest versions of this story appear 6 centuries after the events, in accounts riddled with political bias. By the time Arab armies arrived, the library was likely already gone, its legacy surviving only in fragments. So if none of these events fully explain the library's disappearance, what really happened? The answer might be far less cinematic but no less tragic. Imagine a slow, quiet unraveling. Budgets cut by indifferent rulers, scholars fleeing political turmoil, scrolls rotting in humid storerooms or sold off to pay debts. War and natural disasters chipped away at its walls. The library didn't vanish in a single fiery spectacle. It faded, neglected, until one day no one remembered where its doors had stood. Yet these myths of destruction endure because they speak to something deeper. Our fear of losing knowledge, of watching history itself turn to ash. Whether by Caesar's fire or Omar's decree, the stories we tell about the libraries and reveal more about us than about Alexandria. They're warnings about the fragility of wisdom, the ease with which truth can be erased, and perhaps that's the real legacy of the library's demise, not just the loss of scrolls, but the haunting question of how much more we might have known if only those flames had been stopped. We know Homer as the father of epic poetry, the voice behind the Iliad and the Odyssey, 2 monumental works that shaped Western literature. But what if these surviving texts are just fragments of a much grander tapestry? Ancient sources mention other Homeric epics that vanished long before the Library of Alexandria burned. Poems like the Cypria, the Little Iliad, and the Nostoi epics that filled in the gaps between Homer's surviving works, detailing the Trojan War's origins, its forgotten battles, and the fates of heroes after their return. These lost works weren't just footnotes, they were pillars of a storytelling tradition now crumbled to dust. Imagine discovering an alternate version of the Odyssey where Penelope doesn't wait patiently but sails out herself to find Odysseus. Or an Iliad where Achilles' rage isn't the central tragedy, but one thread in a chorus of voices: Agamemnon's ambition, Hector's desperation, even the gods' schemes laid bare. These variations wouldn't just add new chapters, they'd rewrite how we see Greek heroism. The Iliad and Odyssey as we know them are stark, focused, almost austere in their narrative precision. But what if Homer, or the many poets we call Homer, composed in broader strokes, with epics that sprawled like constellations? The library might have held scrolls proving that these stories were never fixed but fluid, evolving with each retelling. Then there's the tantalizing mystery of the Margites, a comic epic attributed to Homer that mocked its heroes' bumbling incompetence. Aristotle called it the foundation of comedy, a counterbalance to the tragedies of Troy. If found, it could shatter our image of Homer as solely a poet of war and longing, revealing a master of wit who laughed at the very heroes he immortalized. The library's halls might have echoed with this lost humor, a reminder that myth wasn't always solemn, it could be playful, subversive, even irreverent. But perhaps the most haunting loss is the Epigone, the sequel to the Theban cycle that predated Sophocles' Oedipus plays. Ancient summaries suggest it was darker, richer, a tale of generational curses where heroes repeated their father's mistakes with even bloodier consequences. Had it survived, Freud might have written not of Oedipus but of Alcmaeon, the Epigone's tormented protagonist. These lost epics weren't just stories, they were blueprints for how cultures understood fate, morality, the divine. And that's the real tragedy. When the library burned, it didn't just erase poems, it erased ways of thinking. Every lost Homeric text was a window into how Greeks debated justice, mortality, and the whims of the gods. Without them, we're left with a partial mosaic, forever guessing at the full picture. The fire didn't just take scrolls, it took voices, voices that might have whispered across millennia that there's always more to the story. Among the countless treasures lost in Alexandria's flames, perhaps none are as tantalizing as the whispered secrets of ancient Egyptian cosmology. Picture a scroll unfurling to reveal not just myths, but precise celestial diagrams, maps of the heavens so accurate they rival modern astronomy, or creation stories so profound they blurred the line between science and sacred text. The library's shelves may have held the key to understanding how Egypt's priests saw the universe, not as a chaotic void, but as a meticulously ordered cosmos where gods walked among the stars and earthly temples mirrored constellations. Take the legendary Book of Thoth, a text so revered it was said to grant immortality to those who deciphered it. Fragments survive in later Egyptian lore, hinting at lost chapters that detailed the gods' role in measuring the sky, inventing writing, and even shaping time itself. What if the library possessed the complete version? Imagine scrolls describing Thoth not just as a mythic scribe, but as the architect of a celestial blueprint. One where the Nile's floods aligned with Sirius's rising, where pyramids served as gateways to the Duat, the starry realm of the dead. These wouldn't just be stories, they'd be a fusion of astronomy and theology so advanced it would force us to rethink Egypt's scientific legacy. Then there's the enigma of the Dendera zodiac, a later artifact that hints at what might have been lost. Carved on a temple ceiling, it depicts constellations with startling precision, including planets like Mercury and Venus. But here's the chilling part, some scholars argue it's a copy of a far older source, one that might have once resided in Alexandria. If true, the library could have housed star maps dating back thousands of years before Ptolemy, preserving knowledge from a time when Egypt's sky watchers tracked celestial cycles with uncanny accuracy. And what of the creation myths? The standard version, Autumn rising from Nun's waters, is just the surface. Gnostic texts found at Nag Hammadi speak of alternative Egyptian cosmologies, like the Apocryphon of John, where creation unfolds through emanations of divine light. These were deemed heresy by later rulers, but Alexandria's librarians, hungry for every shade of truth, might have safeguarded them. Imagine uncovering a scroll where the universe begins not with a single god, but with a chorus of voices singing matter into being, a vision closer to quantum physics than to Sunday school tales. The most haunting possibility, evidence that Egypt's gods weren't just symbols but celestial beings. The pyramid texts describe pharaohs ascending to join Orion's belt, while the goddess Nut's body arches across the sky as the Milky Way. Were these metaphors, or did the priests possess star charts marking the actual positions of these divine constellations in deep antiquity? The library might have held the answer, with papyri proving that Egypt's mythology was in part a coded astronomy. And then there's the silence, the deliberate erasures. When Rome turned Christian, when flames consumed pagan texts, how much of Egypt's cosmology was lost because it threatened the new order? The library's destruction wasn't just an accident, it was a severing of a chain, a way to ensure certain stars would never be read again, yet echoes linger. In the alignment of temples, in the precision of the Sphinx's gaze toward the equinox sunrise, we catch glimpses of a science wrapped in myth, waiting for its library to be rebuilt. Thoth wasn't just a god, he was a vault of forbidden knowledge, a deity who held the secrets of the universe in his ibis-headed grasp. Ancient texts describe him as the scribe of the gods, the inventor of writing, the weaver of spells so potent they could bend reality itself. And here's the chilling thought. What if his most dangerous teachings, the ones on magic, alchemy, even immortality, weren't just myth but tangible scrolls hidden in the library of Alexandria? The Egyptians believed Thoth authored thousands of books, each containing truths too powerful for mortal hands. Some were said to grant mastery over life and death. Others could summon storms or commune with the dead. If even a fraction of these texts made it to the library's shelves, their loss isn't just tragic, it's a black hole in humanity's understanding of the arcane. The legend of the Emerald Tablet, a single sheet of inscribed green stone, offers a clue. Later alchemists claimed it held Thoth's ultimate secret. As above, so below, a formula linking the cosmic and the earthly. Medieval scholars like Hermes Trismegistus, a fusion of Thoth and Greek wisdom, built entire philosophies on this fragment. But what if the tablet was just a summary? Imagine the library's lost scrolls expanding that cryptic phrase into exhaustive treatises on star alchemy, divine geometry, or the transmutation of the soul. These wouldn't be mere curiosities, they'd be blueprints for a science of the sacred, one that treated magic as rigorous as mathematics. Then there's the unsettling link to Hermeticism, the secret tradition that sprang from Thoth's legacy. Renaissance thinkers like Giordano Bruno whispered of a lost book of Thoth that taught how to animate statues, walk through walls, or glimpse the mind of God. The library might have held earlier, purer versions of these texts unfiltered by centuries of censorship and metaphor. Think of the implications, manuals of psychic exploration, maps of astral realms, even instructions for crafting the philosopher's stone. The Hermetic texts we have today are echoes. Alexandria's originals could have been the thunder, but the most haunting possibility, Thoth's writings on immortality. The Egyptian Book of the Dead contains snippet spells to navigate the afterlife, to remember one's name beyond death. Yet temple inscriptions hint at deeper mysteries, rituals to escape the cycle of rebirth entirely, to become a star that never sets. Were these poetic metaphors or literal technologies of transcendence? The library's scholars, with their insatiable hunger for truth, would have pored over such scrolls, testing their claims. Maybe they found something, maybe that's why the flames came, because here's the truth about forbidden knowledge. It's never just lost, it's erased. Thoth's legacy didn't fade, it was buried under layers of fear and dogma. The library's destruction ensured his most dangerous ideas stayed out of reach, leaving us with fragments and rumors, and yet, like shadows on a temple wall, they persist. In every alchemist's crucible, in every mystic's chant, the ghost of Thoth whispers, the real question isn't whether his secrets burned, it's whether we'll ever be ready to hear them. Sophocles and Euripides shaped the soul of Greek tragedy, their surviving plays standing like pillars of Western drama, but these masterpieces are just fragments of their genius. Sophocles wrote over 120 plays, only 7 survive intact. Euripides penned around 90, with 18 left to us, the rest reduced to ashes scattered in the winds of time. Imagine stepping into the lost wing of the library where these vanished works once sat, their titles alone hinting at worlds of untold stories. Sophocles' Tarius, a brutal tale of betrayal and cannibalism, or The Gathering of the Achaeans, a prequel to the Trojan War brimming with doomed heroes. These weren't just missing scripts, they were entire universes of emotion and moral questioning, wiped clean from history. Euripides' lost works sting even deeper. His surviving plays Medea, the Bacchae already pushed boundaries, giving voice to women, outsiders, and the violently divine. But what of Antiope, where twin brothers debated philosophy versus action on stage? Or Phaethon, a teenager's fatal hubris so vividly described in fragments that scholars weep for the full text? These plays didn't just entertain, they dissected Athenian society, questioning war, gender, and the gods' cruelty. Without them, we see Euripides through a keyhole, unaware of the full storm raging behind the door. The real tragedy isn't just the loss of art, it's the silencing of cultural debates. Sophocles' Niobe, for instance, might have offered a radical counterpoint to Aeschylus' treatment of the same myth. Imagine finding a scroll where Sophocles humanized Niobe's defiance, turning her punishment by the gods from righteous into monstrous, or Euripides' Telephus, which allegedly inspired Aristophanes' comedies, proof that tragedy and satire were in constant dialogue. These missing plays weren't solitary monuments, but nodes in a vibrating web of ideas now severed. And then there's the tantalizing possibility of undiscovered masterpieces. One crumbling papyrus fragment from Oxyrhynchus quotes a line attributed to Sophocles: "The gods plant reason in mortals, highest of all gifts. No known play contains it." Was this from a lost meditation on human intellect, or perhaps Euripides' Hypsipyle, a sprawling epic of motherhood and war, survives only in broken lines, enough to tease its grandeur but never grasp its heart? These gaps aren't just voids, they're invitations to wonder how much richer our understanding of fate, free will, and human suffering might be if these voices still spoke. Most haunting of all is how these losses distort our view of the playwrights themselves. We revere Sophocles as the balanced master of Oedipus Rex, but his lost satyr plays raucous, bawdy comedies performed alongside tragedies reveal a man who laughed as fiercely as he mourned. Euripides, often painted as the rebel, might have had more conservative works we'll never read. The library's ashes didn't just burn plays, they burned dimensions of these artists, leaving us with flattened portraits of once untamable minds. Yet fragments endure, like embers refusing to die. A scrap of Sophocles' Ichneutae describes satyrs hunting a stolen cow, their crude humor preserved on brittle parchment. Euripides' Cresphont survives in a single chilling line: "The hands of the gods are slow, but they never miss." These shards hint at a breathtaking truth. Somewhere in Alexandria's labyrinth, complete scrolls might have once waited, holding the full weight of Greek tragedy's golden age. Now we're left to piece together a mosaic with half its tiles gone, forever wondering what picture they might have formed. Beneath the polished marble halls of Alexandria's library, there might have lurked scrolls that pulsed with the ecstatic, terrifying heart of ancient mystery cults. Texts so secret, initiates guarded them with their lives. Among the most enigmatic were the Orphic Mysteries, a shadowy tradition that promised salvation through sacred songs and forbidden knowledge. Unlike the public rituals of Olympus, Orphism whispered of a cosmos born from the ashes of devoured gods, of souls trapped in a cycle of rebirth, and of a way out through purification and divine communion. Imagine stumbling upon a library scroll detailing the Orphic hymns in their entirety, not the fragmented verses we have now, but the complete incantations used to summon deities like Dionysus or Persephone from the underworld. These wouldn't be mere poems, they'd be roadmaps to transcendence, each line a key to unlocking layers of reality hidden from ordinary eyes. Then there's the haunting question of the Orphic Rhapsodies, a lost epic that allegedly contained the cult's creation myth. Later references describe a universe where Zeus swallows the first god, Phanes, absorbing his power to become the Alpha and Omega of existence. But what if Alexandria's copy included illustrations, celestial diagrams showing how this myth mirrored star patterns, or alchemical recipes for replicating the god's transformation within the human soul? The Orphics didn't just tell stories, they encoded truths about the nature of time, matter, and divinity. Their texts might have bridged the gap between myth and science in ways we've barely begun to guess. Even more elusive were the Dionysian rites, frenzied rituals where worshippers channeled the god's madness to shatter the illusion of mortal limits. Surviving accounts speak of midnight dances, of initiates drinking sacred potions that dissolve the ego, of raw flesh torn in symbolic communion. But these are outsiders' sketches, garbled, sensationalized. What if the library held scrolls penned by the cult's own hierophants, describing exactly how to prepare the kykeon, the ritual brew that opened the gates of perception? Or manuals teaching the sparagmos, the act of tearing apart live animals, or, in mythic terms, the god himself to release his divine essence. These wouldn't be mere records, they'd be living instructions frozen in ink waiting to resurrect the god's presence. And then there's the darkest whisper, the Bacchic underground. Later Christian writers like Clement of Alexandria accused these cults of everything from orgies to infanticide, but what if their real crime was knowledge? The library might have held proof that Dionysian rites weren't just drunken revels, but precise psychological operations. Initiates underwent simulated deaths, ego dissolution, and rebirth, a prototherapy for the soul. Imagine finding a scroll where the cult's elders analyzed these techniques, noting how certain drum rhythms induced trances, or how torchlight flickering at specific frequencies could evoke visions. This wouldn't be superstition, it'd be a lost science of ecstasy. Yet the most chilling thought isn't that these texts burned, it's that someone wanted them gone. Mystery cults thrived on exclusivity, their power lay in secrecy. If the library's scrolls laid bare the Orphic passwords or the Dionysian sacraments, they'd render the mysteries powerless. No wonder legends claim that zealots, not accidents, might have torched those particular shelves, because some truths aren't just dangerous, they're alive. And what the library preserved, perhaps, wasn't just words, but the very pulse of the gods themselves. Before Socrates, before Plato, there was a generation of thinkers who dared to question the fabric of reality itself, the pre-Socratics. These philosophers didn't just ponder the world, they tore it apart, searching for its hidden bones. Heraclitus saw fire as the fundamental essence, a universe in eternal flux. Pythagoras worshipped numbers as divine, the secret language of creation. But here's the thing, we only know their ideas through fragments, second-hand quotes, and the whispers of later scholars. The Library of Alexandria might have held their original works unfiltered, uncensored, blazing with the raw power of their thoughts. Imagine unrolling a scroll where Heraclitus didn't just say, "No man steps in the same river twice," but expanded it into a full cosmology where even the gods were subject to change. Take Pythagoras, not the man, but the myth. Today, we remember him for triangles and harmonies, but his followers swore oaths of secrecy, believing numbers held the keys to immortality. The library could have housed texts where Pythagoras explained why certain musical intervals healed the soul, or how geometric shapes resonated with celestial spheres. Later writers like Aristotle dismissed some of these ideas as mysticism. But what if the original treatises revealed a rigor we've underestimated? Maybe his famous theorem was just the tip of a numerical iceberg, lost manuscripts detailing how primes encoded cosmic truths, or how the dodecahedron represented the shape of the heavens. Then there's Empedocles, the philosopher-poet who claimed the universe was ruled by love and strife, attraction and repulsion, a theory eerily echoing modern physics. His surviving verses are beautiful, but what if the library preserved his technical diagrams, scrolls illustrating how these forces wove the elements together, with annotations debating whether trees grew upward because of love for the sun or strife against the earth? These weren't just metaphors, they were prototypes of scientific models lost before they could evolve, but the real tragedy might be the lesser-known minds. Think of Anaximander, who speculated about infinite worlds and the first humans emerging from fish, or Parmenides, who argued that all change was illusion, reality, an unchanging, perfect whole. Their surviving fragments are tantalizing hints, but Alexandria's shelves could have held their systematic arguments, entire books dismantling perception, proving the unreality of time, or mapping the void beyond the stars. What makes these losses so haunting is how modern they feel. Heraclitus' flux mirrors quantum uncertainty. Pythagoras' math mysticism echoes string theory's vibrations. Empedocles' forces resemble gravity and electromagnetism. The pre-Socratics weren't just guessing, they were constructing frameworks, often without the tools to test them. The library might have preserved their mistakes, to the dead ends and wild leaps that show how philosophy stumbles toward truth. And then there's the darkest irony. Socrates, Plato's teacher, supposedly dismissed these thinkers as cloud gazers. But without their lost texts, we'll never know if he misunderstood them or feared how right they might have been. The fire didn't just burn scrolls, it burned alternate paths for human thought, roads not taken that might have led us to an entirely different present. Plato's account of Atlantis isn't just a story, it's a riddle wrapped in a disaster, a cautionary tale about hubris buried beneath the waves. But what if the library of Alexandria held more than just his dialogues? Imagine scrolls detailing eyewitness accounts of the sinking city, or maps marking its location not beyond the Pillars of Hercules, as Plato claimed, but somewhere unexpected like the Sahara's lost river valleys or the ruins of the Minoan civilization, swallowed by a tsunami. The library was a magnet for obscure knowledge, collecting geographies and histories from Phoenician traders, Egyptian priests, even sailors who swore they'd seen the ruins of a golden metropolis beneath shallow waters. These weren't just tall tales, they were potential keys to a mystery that's haunted us for millennia. Then there's Hyperborea, the mythical land of eternal sun beyond the north wind. Greek poets like Pindar described it as a paradise where giants lived without old age or disease, bathed in Apollo's light. But Hyperborea wasn't just legend, it might have been grounded in real encounters. Ancient Scythian traders spoke of a distant, warm land where the sun never set in summer, a place modern scholars suspect could have been Scandinavia or the Baltic. The library's collectors, hungry for every scrap of geographic lore, might have gathered first-hand accounts of these voyages, scrolls detailing landscapes that matched Hyperborea's description. Imagine finding a text where a Greek explorer describes standing on a shore at midnight, watching the sun skim the horizon, proof that myth and reality once touched. But the real enigma lies in the connections between these lost worlds. Plato's Atlantis was a naval power destroyed by divine wrath. Hyperborea was a utopia untouched by time. Yet both share uncanny parallels with older myths like the Egyptian story of Ahmen-Ptah, a kingdom drowned when the gods grew angry, or the Hindu Dwarka, a city sunk beneath the waves after its ruler defied Krishna. The library could have held scrolls linking these traditions, revealing a pattern of cataclysms preserved across cultures. Were these just moral fables or fragmented memories of real disasters, a comet strike, a mega tsunami that reshaped human history, the most tantalizing clue? Plato himself claimed his Atlantis story came from Egyptian priests who warned that civilizations rise and fall in cycles. Alexandria's librarians, with their access to Egypt's oldest temple archives, might have possessed the original sources Plato drew from texts that described not just one lost city, but many. Think of the implications: a global network of advanced cultures erased by time, their existence preserved only in whispers. The library's destruction didn't just burn books, it severed our last living link to those who might have remembered. Yet hints linger. In 2014, a team scanning the Spanish marshes found a strange metallic alloy one Plato claimed lined Atlantis temples. In the Arctic, Hyperborean solar symbolism echoes in Sami and Norse myths. These fragments suggest the library's lost scrolls weren't just fiction, but echoes of a truth too vast to fit into history as we know it. Atlantis and Hyperborea might be more than myths. They could be missing chapters in humanity's story, chapters we'll never fully read but can't stop trying to reconstruct. The Babylonians didn't just watch the stars, they spoke their language, mapping the heavens with a precision that still leaves modern astronomers stunned. If the Library of Alexandria housed even a fraction of their knowledge, its shelves would have groaned under the weight of cuneiform tablets detailing celestial movements down to the minute, omens drawn from planetary alignments, and rituals timed to the dance of constellations. Imagine unrolling a scroll where Babylonian scholars documented the exact day Jupiter reversed its path, not as a mythic sign, but as a calculable event, their math so advanced it predicted eclipses centuries before they happened. This wasn't astrology as we dismiss it today. It was a fusion of science and divinity, where every shooting star was a god's whisper, and every comet a royal decree written in fire. At the heart of this lore lay the Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic, a cosmic battle where the god Marduk slays the primordial chaos dragon Tiamat, carving her body into the sky and earth. But what if Alexandria's copy wasn't just the standardized version we know? Variations of this story echoed across Mesopotamia, each city tweaking it to glorify their local deity. The library might have held the lost Nippur recension, where Enlil, not Marduk, claimed victory, or a Sippar scroll that described Tiamat not as a monster but as a grieving mother. These differences weren't just poetic, they were political, rewriting the universe's origin to suit the rulers who commissioned them. To hold these alternate versions would be to glimpse the raw, unfiltered struggle for power beneath the myth's polished surface. Then there's the Enuma Anu Enlil, a sprawling collection of 70 tablets cataloging celestial omens. One tablet might warn that a red halo around the moon meant drought. Another claimed Mars hovering near Scorpio foretold a king's assassination. But here's the twist: modern scholars have found these omens eerily accurate when matched to historical events. A recorded blood moon in 689 BCE aligned with Assyrian records of a solar eclipse and a subsequent rebellion. Was this coincidence, or did the Babylonians recognize astronomical patterns we're only now rediscovering? The library's scholars, with their hunger for cross-cultural knowledge, might have compared these omens to Egyptian or Greek portents, uncovering a universal code hidden in the stars. But the real treasure could have been the lost astrolabes of Nineveh, three-dimensional star maps molded in clay. Later Greek texts mentioned Babylonian devices that modeled planetary motion, crude antecedents to the Antikythera mechanism. If Alexandria preserved these tools, they'd rewrite the history of technology, proving that Near Eastern scholars built working cosmologies millennia before Copernicus. Picture a librarian's note scribbled in the margin. Tested the bronze orb from Babylon. It predicts Saturn's return within 1 degree of error. Most haunting of all are the personal stories buried in these texts. A scribe's diary might confess his terror at an eclipse, or a queen's letter begged priests to delay her coronation until Venus left retrograde. These weren't dry records, they were human fears and hopes etched in clay. The library didn't just lose books, it lost voices that knew the stars as living gods, voices that might have taught us to hear them sing. Cleopatra wasn't just a queen. She was a force of nature, a ruler whose life blurred the lines between politics, legend, and the darkest corners of ancient science. Historians like Plutarch and Cassius Dio gave us glimpses of her reign, but their accounts were written decades after her death, filtered through Roman biases and the victor's lens. The real tragedy, the Library of Alexandria almost certainly housed first-hand records of her rule, diplomatic correspondence, court diaries, even her own writings. Imagine unrolling a scroll penned by Cleopatra herself, detailing her strategies to outmaneuver Rome's generals or her secret negotiations with Mark Antony. These wouldn't just be historical footnotes, they'd be raw, unfiltered insights into the mind of a woman who played the empire's greatest men like pieces on a board. Then there's the mystery of her infamous poisons cabinet. Ancient rumors claimed she tested toxins on prisoners, seeking the perfect, untraceable weapon. Roman propaganda, possibly, but consider this: Cleopatra descended from the Ptolemies, a dynasty steeped in Egyptian occult sciences. The library's medical archives could have held her personal notes on venomous serpents, lethal herbs, or antidotes distilled from rare minerals. Later alchemists like Zosimos of Panopolis referenced lost Egyptian texts on transmutation and healing texts that might have included Cleopatra's own experiments. Was her suicide by asp just a dramatic end, or the final act of a ruler who'd spent years mastering death itself? But the most tantalizing losses are the biographies. Contemporary scholars like Philostratus mention a now-vanished life of Cleopatra by her personal physician, Olympus. What secrets did it hold? Perhaps accounts of her famed banquet of dominance, where she dissolved a pearl in vinegar to prove her wealth, or darker tales like her alleged role in the deaths of siblings who threatened her throne. The library might have preserved these narratives alongside her own propaganda, revealing how she crafted her image as both Isis incarnate and a Hellenistic philosopher queen. And what of her alliances? Scrolls detailing her dealings with Julius Caesar and Antony wouldn't just chronicle romance, they'd expose the brutal calculus of survival. Did she really seduce Rome's leaders or outthink them? A lost letter to Antony might reveal her true feelings, strategic affection, or something deeper. Even more explosive could be records of her proposed alliance with the Parthians against Rome, proof that her ambitions stretched far beyond Egypt's borders. The bitter irony: Cleopatra's greatest weapon wasn't poison or charm, it was knowledge. She spoke 9 languages, studied astronomy, and reportedly authored treatises on medicine and alchemy. In another era, the library might have crowned her its greatest patron. Instead, her legacy burns in its ashes, leaving us to wonder how much of her genius was lost to the flames, and how much was deliberately erased by those who feared a woman who knew too much. Hidden beneath the official history of early Christianity lies a shadow library, a collection of texts so explosive they threaten to rewrite the faith's very foundations. Among the ashes of Alexandria, we might have lost not just books, but entire gospels that painted Jesus not as a distant savior, but as a teacher of hidden wisdom, whispering secrets to Mary Magdalene while the disciples slept. The Nag Hammadi codices, discovered in 1945, gave us a glimpse of these forbidden texts: the Gospel of Thomas with its cryptic sayings, the Gospel of Philip hinting at a sacred marriage, the Apocryphon of John revealing a cosmic drama of fallen angels and trapped divine sparks. But here's the chilling thought: these surviving copies are fragments. The library could have held the originals, complete with annotations by the heretics who cherished them, their margins crammed with arguments against the bishops who called them liars. Consider the implications if Alexandria housed the Gospel of Mary in its entirety. The version we have is torn, its middle pages lost, yet even the surviving lines shatter conventions. Mary emerges as Jesus' closest confidant, the one who understood his deepest teachings while Peter bristled with jealousy. What if the missing sections revealed rituals, meditations, or even a female priesthood? The library's copy might have preserved the unedited truth before the institutional church scrubbed it away, proof that early Christianity was a battlefield of visions, not a monolith. Then there's the enigma of the secret Gospel of Mark, a text so controversial scholars still debate its authenticity. A single letter from Clement of Alexandria references a spiritual version of Mark's Gospel reserved for the initiated. Fragments describe Jesus performing secret nocturnal baptisms, mingling with a young man clothed only in a linen cloth, a scene dripping with mystery. Was this a metaphor for enlightenment or evidence of lost initiation rites? The library could have held the full manuscript, settling the debate forever. Instead, we're left with whispers and accusations of forgery, a ghost text haunting the edges of orthodoxy, but the real bombshell might have been the demiurge. Gnostic texts like the hypostasis of the archons portray the creator god of Genesis not as the true divinity, but as a blind, bumbling tyrant Yaldabaoth, who trapped human souls in flesh to keep them from escaping to the higher light. To find this scroll in Alexandria would mean early Christians were openly debating whether their own god was a cosmic jailer. Imagine the fury of later bishops burning such heresies to protect the faith's unity. The library's destruction didn't just erase books, it may have been the final act of a theological war, ensuring only one version of Christianity would survive. Yet the most haunting loss isn't the texts we know about, it's the ones we don't. What if the library held a gospel written by Judas rehabilitating history's greatest villain? Or a hymn book of the Ophites who revered the serpent of Eden as humanity's true liberator? Every scrap of Nag Hammadi feels like a message in a bottle, washed ashore from a shipwrecked world of thought. Alexandria's shelves could have been the ark that saved them all. Now we're left piecing together a puzzle with most of the pieces missing, forever wondering how many more revelations turned to smoke on the day the library burned. Long before laboratories and peer-reviewed journals, alchemists pursued their art in dimly lit workshops, scribbling secrets onto parchment in codes only the initiated could decipher. The Library of Alexandria might have been the greatest repository of these forbidden sciences, a place where Egyptian temple rites collided with Greek philosophy, where the formulas for turning lead into gold weren't just metaphors but precise recipes guarded like state secrets. At the heart of this lost knowledge sat the legendary Emerald Tablet, a single sheet of inscribed green stone attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the mythical fusion of Thoth and Hermes. Its famous maxim, "as above, so below," wasn't poetic flair. It was the cornerstone of a worldview where the cosmos mirrored the earth, where manipulating metals could alter fate itself. What if the library held not just the tablet's cryptic phrases, but entire commentaries unpacking its meaning? Imagine scrolls where Alexandrian scholars debated whether the sun is its father, the moon its mother, referred to literal celestial bodies or alchemical processes, gold dissolved in aqua regia, silver distilled under specific phases of the moon. These wouldn't be primitive guesswork. Some historians argue that Alexandrian alchemists like Maria the Jewess invented stills and water baths still used in labs today. Her lost writings on divine dew, a substance that could dissolve gold, might have been early descriptions of hydrochloric acid. The library's destruction didn't just erase superstition, it vaporized centuries of proto-chemical experimentation. Then there's the Symbols of Panoples, whose surviving fragments hint at a vast, lost encyclopedia of alchemy. He described visions of priests being dismembered in glass vessels, not madness, but allegories for chemical processes like sublimation and fermentation. His work referenced older Egyptian sources, now gone, that detailed how to craft philosophers' mercury, a volatile liquid metal believed to hold the key to transmutation. Had these texts endured, they might have bridged the gap between ancient metallurgy and modern chemistry, sparing scientists like Newton decades of obsessive decoding. But the real tragedy lies in the gaps. Later Arabic alchemists like Jabir ibn Hayyan often cited, the books of the ancient Greeks and Egyptians, lamenting how much had been lost. His own breakthroughs in distillation and crystallization were likely built on fragments salvaged from Alexandria's ruins. Imagine what else might have passed through those halls: scrolls detailing alloy ratios that could mimic gold, or early batteries like the Baghdad artifacts, or even rudimentary atomic theories hinted at in Democritus' writings. The library didn't just burn books, it severed a chain of knowledge, forcing humanity to reinvent wheels that had already been spinning for millennia. Perhaps most haunting is the thought of what never got rediscovered. The emerald tablets promised that mastering the small could reveal the grand wasn't just mystical nonsense. It echoed the scientific method: test, observe, refine. In another timeline where Alexandria's alchemical scrolls survived, we might have had Renaissance labs centuries earlier, or a Newton who didn't waste half his life chasing leads that the library's scholars had already debunked. The fire didn't just delay progress, it erased alternate paths, roads where magic and science walked hand in hand, where the secrets of the universe weren't locked in equations but whispered in the flicker of alchemical flames. We think of Aristotle as the father of logic, the systematizer whose works like metaphysics and poetics became the backbone of Western thought. But what if the Aristotle we know is just a fraction of the philosopher's true genius? Ancient sources whisper of dialogues he wrote in his youth, brilliant, literary, even playful texts that vanished long before the Middle Ages. Cicero praised their golden eloquence, comparing them to Plato's finest works. Yet today, not a single one survives intact. The Library of Alexandria might have held these lost masterpieces, scrolls where Aristotle didn't just argue dry definitions but dazzled with myths, wit, and the kind of narrative flair that could have reshaped how we see philosophy itself. Take his Eudemus, a dialogue on the soul's immortality. Later philosophers quoted fragments where Aristotle spun a haunting parable: a soldier waking from death's threshold, describing the afterlife as a place where time unraveled like a spool of thread. This wasn't the clinical Aristotle of syllogisms. This was a storyteller blending drama and deep thought in ways that could have bridged the gap between Plato's myths and his own later analytics. Imagine finding the full-text proof that logic and poetry weren't opposites to Aristotle, but two sides of the same coin. Then there's the Protrepticus, his lost manifesto on why philosophy matters. Quotations suggest it opened with a thunderbolt of a question: if you could choose between knowing everything or having everything, which would you take? The surviving scraps read like a philosophical rallying cry, urging readers to trade wealth for wisdom. But here's the twist: some scholars believe this dialogue contained early versions of ideas he later systematized in works like Nicomachean Ethics. The library's copy might have revealed how Aristotle's thinking evolved, showing the messy, passionate origins of concepts we now see as rigid doctrines. But the real bombshell, the rumor that Aristotle wrote dialogues mocking Plato's theory of forms. A medieval Arab scholar, Al-Farabi, referenced a satirical text where Aristotle compared the forms to a carpenter who builds invisible chairs no one can sit on. If true, this would flip our view of their relationship. Instead of a respectful student refining his teacher's ideas, we'd see a young firebrand openly challenging Plato's core beliefs, only to later sanitize his critiques into dry objections in the metaphysics. The library's ashes might have consumed the key to understanding philosophy's greatest feud, and that's the true tragedy. The Aristotle we have is a marble statue, polished, imposing, but frozen. The lost dialogues were the living man, witty, contradictory, unafraid to experiment. Had they survived, philosophy might have grown less dogmatic, remembering that even its sternest master began as a poet of ideas. Instead, we're left with echoes, ghostly hints of a thinker far more daring than history remembers. Among the most tantalizing mysteries of the lost library are the whispers of maps so advanced they defy the timeline of history as we know it. Ancient accounts describe the Library of Alexandria holding celestial charts etched onto copper plates and maritime logs detailing lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules territories modern scholars recognize as the Americas. The Greek historian Strabo wrote of a scroll called the Periplus of Hanno, a Carthaginian sailor's account of a journey down the African coast, possibly reaching as far as Gabon. But what if the library housed even bolder records? Imagine a map where the outline of Brazil appeared centuries before Columbus, or a sketch of the Bering Strait's frozen bridges, knowledge passed down from forgotten Bronze Age explorers. These wouldn't just be curiosities, they'd be evidence of a global network of trade and exploration scrubbed from collective memory. Then there's the enigma of Piri Reis. In 1513, the Ottoman admiral crafted a world map incorporating what he called ancient sources, including charts from Alexandria's ruins. His depiction of Antarctica's ice-free coastline, a landmass buried under glaciers for millennia, matches modern sonar scans of the continent's submerged topography. Coincidence or proof that the library preserved geographic knowledge from a pre-glacial era, when warmer climates allowed seafarers to chart lands now locked in ice? The implications are staggering. If Alexandria's cartographers had access to maps drawn thousands of years earlier, it suggests a lost epoch of exploration, one where advanced civilizations sailed oceans we assume they never crossed. But the real shocker lies in the details. Claudius Ptolemy's geography, a 2nd century masterpiece, contained coordinates for over 8,000 locations, yet his work was likely a fraction of the library's holdings. Later Arab scholars like al-Idrisi referenced even older texts describing the Fortunate Isles, possibly the Canaries, and a vast landmass west of Africa. Were these accounts based on Phoenician voyages that reached the Caribbean, or Egyptian expeditions following the Atlantic's currents to the shores of the New World? The library might have held logs from these journeys, scrolls detailing tides, star paths, and encounters with distant peoples' records that could rewrite the story of human migration. Consider, too, the library's ties to Eratosthenes, the scholar who calculated Earth's circumference with shocking accuracy using little more than shadows and wells. His lost treatise on the measurement of the Earth wasn't just math, it was a navigational Bible. If his work included maps adjusted for spherical projection, a technique not rediscovered until the Renaissance, it would explain why medieval portland suddenly showed uncanny precision. The library didn't just store maps, it curated a living science of geography, one that fused astronomy, geometry, and first-hand traveler accounts into tools that could guide ships across uncharted seas. Yet the most haunting question isn't what these maps showed, it's who used them. Viking sagas speak of Great Ireland, possibly Newfoundland, settled centuries before Leif Erikson. Polynesian oral histories tell of round-trip voyages to South America. Even the sweet potato, native to the Andes, spread across the Pacific before Columbus. These aren't anomalies, they're breadcrumbs pointing to a world where the library's knowledge wasn't just theoretical but practical. Its destruction didn't just burn parchment, it severed humanity's memory of its own daring, leaving later explorers to stumble upon new worlds that had been known for millennia. Perhaps that's the real tragedy. The library's maps weren't just lines on papyrus. They were invitations to cross oceans, to question boundaries, to remember that every undiscovered country was once someone's home. And in their absence, we've been forced to rediscover our planet piece by piece, unaware that the answers were already inked in Alexandria's halls, waiting for us to sail back into their light. The Greek magical papyri are one of history's strangest relics, scraps of parchment crammed with spells that defy categorization, where Egyptian gods answer to Greek incantations and Babylonian demons whisper in Coptic. These texts, often scribbled in haste by practicing magicians, weren't just superstition, they were the fusion of an entire world's esoteric knowledge. And while most were found in the Egyptian desert centuries after the library burned, their roots almost certainly stretch back to Alexandria's shelves. Imagine a scroll where Hecate, the Greek goddess of witchcraft, is invoked alongside Thoth, using Hebrew divine names as power words, a chaotic, brilliant synthesis that could only have been born in the library's cosmopolitan halls. Take the famous Mithra's liturgy, a spell promising to elevate the soul through celestial spheres. It instructs the magician to breathe in sunlight, chant vowels as if they were divine frequencies, and visualize their body dissolving into light, a ritual that reads like ancient astral projection. But here's the twist. The text name drops Persian, Egyptian, and Greek deities interchangeably, treating them as facets of the same cosmic force. This wasn't mere cultural borrowing. It was a deliberate alchemy of traditions, the kind of experiment that thrived in Alexandria's intermingling of scholars and mystics. The library didn't just house these texts, it likely incubated them, providing the raw materials: Zoroastrian star lore, demotic curse tablets, Orphic hymns, that magicians mashed together into something wholly new. Then there's the haunting Sword of Dardanus, a love spell so potent it blurts out, "You will burn for me as this papyrus burns." The ritual involves carving a lodestone with divine names, then burying it near the target's home, a mix of mineral science and metaphysical coercion. But the real shock is in the footnotes. Scribbled in one margin is a note attributing the spell to the sacred books of Hermes. Was this a reference to the lost Hermetica, those legendary treatises on divine magic said to be stashed in the library? If so, it means the papyri weren't fringe nonsense, but offshoots of a deeper, sanctioned tradition. Alexandria's librarians, ever the archivists, might have catalogued these spells alongside geometry and medicine, seeing no boundary between the rational and the arcane. But the most unsettling fragments are the voces magici, strings of nonsense words like ablanathanalba or barbaria that appear in dozens of spells. Modern scholars once dismissed them as gibberish until someone noticed their palindromes or transliterated Hebrew. These weren't random, they were attempts to harness the raw power of divine languages to tap into the primal sounds of creation. The library, with its unparalleled collection of multilingual texts, would have been ground zero for this linguistic alchemy. A magician could compare Phoenician incantations to Egyptian hymns, isolating syllables that seemed to crackle with energy. And then there's the ultimate taboo, necromancy. One papyrus, dubbed the necromantic ritual of Babylon, describes summoning a dead spirit to reveal all hidden things. The ingredients myrrh, owl feathers, a scrap of mummy linen, suggest an Egyptian base, but the incantation name drops Greek underworld gods and Assyrian demons. It's a Frankenstein's monster of a spell stitched together from half a dozen cultures. If the library preserved its precursor, it wasn't just keeping books, it was curating a Pandora's box of forbidden knowledge, a manual for peeling back the veil between worlds. Yet here's the irony. These papyri survived precisely because they were hidden in the desert, deemed too dangerous for the library's final days. The real magic wasn't in the spells themselves, but in the worldview they embodied, one where knowledge had no borders, where every tradition could be remixed, tested, perfected. That spirit didn't burn with Alexandria. It seeped into the cracks of history, waiting for us to decipher its next incantation. Herophilus didn't just study the human body, he cracked it open like a code, mapping its hidden pathways with a precision that would shock even modern surgeons. In the halls of Alexandria's medical wing, he became the first known anatomist to dissect cadavers publicly, peeling back skin and muscle to reveal the pulsing machinery beneath. But here's the gut-wrenching twist. His groundbreaking work, documented in scrolls like on anatomy and midwifery, vanished when the library burned. Imagine unrolling one of those lost texts and finding the first accurate description of the nervous system, not as vague channels like his predecessors, but as fibers originating from the brain itself. Herophilus didn't just guess, he proved, slicing through cadaver after cadaver to trace nerves like roads on a map. even naming the duodenum for its 12-finger length. His discoveries weren't just ahead of their time, they were centuries ahead. The real tragedy, his work on the brain. Ancient sources claim he identified the cerebrum and cerebellum as distinct structures, theorizing that one governed thought while the other controlled movement. He traced veins and arteries like a cartographer, distinguishing between sensory and motor nerves long before Galen borrowed his ideas. But here's what keeps historians awake at night. His lost scroll on the pulse allegedly classified rhythms so meticulously he could diagnose diseases by touch alone. Later physicians like Erasistratus built on his findings, but without Herophilus' original manuscripts, we're left with second-hand fragments like trying to reconstruct a symphony from a few scattered notes. Then there's the scandal. Herophilus didn't just dissect the dead. Rumors swirled that he vivisected criminals sentenced to execution, studying living organs as they failed. The Roman encyclopedist Celsus called it necessary cruelty, while Tertullian, a Christian writer, branded him a butcher. But what if the library's scrolls held his justification notes, arguing that saving thousands outweighed the suffering of a few? Or worse, what if they proved the rumors false and his detractors slandered him to smear Alexandria's scientific legacy? The fire didn't just erase his findings, it burned away the context, leaving us to wrestle with ethics in a vacuum. Most haunting is his lost research on childbirth. Herophilus was the first to describe ovaries and fallopian tubes, debunking Hippocrates' claim that wombs wandered like restless animals. His midwifery scroll might have contained illustrations of fetal positions, techniques to ease labor, even early prototypes of forceps. Later Byzantine texts reference his tools, hooks, speculums, scalpels, but without his manuals, medieval midwives relearned through trial and error, costing countless lives. The library's ashes didn't just claim knowledge, they sentenced generations to rediscover what Herophilus had already mastered, and that's the cruelest irony. His work was so advanced, Rome suppressed it. As the empire Christianized, dissection became sacrilege, and Herophilus' name faded into heresy. By the time Renaissance anatomists like Vesalius resurrected his methods, they had no idea they were walking a path he'd paved centuries earlier. The library's flames didn't just burn parchment, they severed a lifeline, leaving medicine to stumble in the dark for 1,000 years. Herophilus didn't just lose his place in history. We lost the chance to know how much further he might have led us. The Sibylline books weren't just prophecies, they were Rome's secret playbook for survival, whispered verses tucked away in the temple of Jupiter and consulted only in moments of existential crisis. Kings and consuls trembled before their riddles, interpreting famine, war, and divine wrath through their cryptic lines. But here's the chilling question: did Alexandria's library hold its own copies? Imagine scrolls where sibyls, those frenzied prophetesses who spoke in hexameter, penned visions not just for Rome, but for the entire Mediterranean world. The fragments we have hint at something monumental, a sprawling network of oracles, each adding layers to a grand tapestry of fate. If the library preserved these texts, their loss isn't just about missing poetry, it's about losing the operating manual for how ancient empires navigated the unseen. Consider the sheer scale of what's gone. The original Sibylline books were said to number in the thousands, compiled over centuries from the ravings of priestesses at Cumae, Erythrae, and beyond. Rome's Senate guarded their official copies like nuclear codes, burning any unauthorized duplicates. Chinese letter control over their power. But Alexandria, ever the collector, might have smuggled versions into its archives, scrolls recording prophecies deemed too dangerous for Rome's eyes. Some scholars speculate these included alternate interpretations of the famous Punic curse, the prophecy that warned of Carthage's rise and fall. The library's version could have revealed nuances scrubbed from the official record, like how Hannibal nearly fulfilled an oracle's doom by crossing the Alps with elephants. Then there's the eerie overlap with Jewish and Christian traditions. The so-called Sibylline oracles that survived outside Rome texts like the Oracle of the Potter foretold everything from the Nile drying up to the rise of messianic kings. The library likely housed these heterodox visions alongside the Roman canon, creating a dialogue between state-sanctioned prophecy and underground revelation. Picture a scholar comparing Cumi's prediction of a savior born of the East to Hebrew apocalyptic texts, asking, were these independent visions or fragments of a shared cosmic script? But the real tragedy lies in the mechanics of divination. The Sibyls didn't just predict, they prescribed. When Rome's envoys opened the books during disasters, they found not just warnings but rituals, commands to summon foreign gods like Cybele or build temples to obscure deities. The library's scrolls might have contained the behind-the-scenes lore, explanations of why certain sacrifices averted plague or how to interpret the weeping statue omen that preceded Caesar's assassination. Without them, we're left with dry summaries in Livy's histories, the visceral terror of the rituals reduced to footnotes. Most haunting of all, the Sibylline tradition might have been a living science. Later Neoplatonists like Porphyry treated prophecy as a technology, a way to hack the fabric of time. If Alexandria's scholars had access to raw oracular data, detailed accounts of trance states, celestial alignments during prophecies, even early statistics on which predictions came true, they could have reverse-engineered divination into something resembling cognitive psychology. Instead, the fire left us with charred scraps, forcing modern historians to play detective with echoes of echoes. The Sibyls' voices didn't just fade, they were systematically erased, leaving us to wonder how much of Rome's rise was written in those lost verses and how much was sheer luck. Manetho wasn't just another Egyptian priest scribbling in the shadows of the temple. He was history's first great archivist, a man who dared to compile 3,000 years of pharaonic rule into a single, sweeping chronicle. His Egyptiaca was meant to be Egypt's definitive history, a bridge between the gods who walked among mortals and the mortals who became gods. But here's the gut punch. What survives today is a shredded patchwork of quotes and paraphrases in later writers like Josephus and Eusebius, like trying to reconstruct a pyramid from scattered bricks. The Library of Alexandria almost certainly held the original, uncut version. Scrolls that didn't just list kings and dates, but pulsed with the blood, betrayal, and divine madness that defined Egypt's throne. Imagine unrolling Manetho's complete dynastic records and finding more than just dry succession lists. Later fragments hint at juicy details lost in abbreviation. The pharaoh who drowned his own court in wine as a sacrifice to Sobek, the queen who waged war wearing a golden scorpion crown, the heretic king who tried to erase the old gods and nearly tore the kingdom apart. These weren't just footnotes, they were the spine of Egypt's identity, proof that its history was as much myth as fact. The library's copy might have preserved Manetho's sources, temple annals, royal decrees, even the private diaries of viziers who plotted behind gilded doors. Without them, we're left with skeletal king lists, the flesh of the story scraped away. Then there's the tantalizing case of the Hyksos, the mysterious shepherd kings who ruled Egypt during its darkest age. Manetho's surviving snippets described them as brutal invaders, but later archaeologists found evidence they were Canaanite traders who assimilated peacefully. Did the library's full text clarify this contradiction? Perhaps Manetho recorded oral histories from both sides, conquerors painting themselves as liberators, priests spinning tales of foreign demons. The difference isn't academic, it's a window into how history gets weaponized, how victors rewrite the past to sanctify their present. But the real bombshell might have been Manetho's treatment of the gods themselves. His chronology stretched back tens of thousands of years before the first pharaoh, into an era when deities like Ptah and Ra supposedly ruled directly over men. Later Greek writers mocked this as fantasy, but what if Manetho was preserving something far older? A pre-dynastic oral tradition that remembered the Nile's first settlers as coexisting with something beyond human. The library could have held his sources, temple inscriptions now crumbled to dust, or priestly genealogies linking living pharaohs to divine ancestors. Most haunting of all is the possibility that Manetho knew exactly how much history was being erased. He lived under Ptolemaic rule, a time when Greek elites pushed Egyptian culture into the shadows. His Egyptiocha wasn't just a record, it was a rescue mission, an attempt to cement his civilization's memory before it faded. The library's destruction ensured that mission failed, leaving us with fragments that taunt us with how much we'll never know. Manetho didn't just lose his life's work, we lost the keys to a kingdom of stories, each one a thread pulled from the tapestry of time. When the Renaissance first flickered to life in Italy, it wasn't just rediscovered Roman statues or Greek manuscripts that ignited minds, it was the ghost of Alexandria. The mere idea of that lost library, with its whispered troves of forbidden knowledge, became a siren call for thinkers like Pico della Mirandola and Marsilio Ficino. These men weren't just scholars, they were intellectual treasure hunters, convinced that somewhere in the ashes of antiquity lay secrets powerful enough to reshape the world. And what's wild is how little they actually knew about the library's contents. The myth itself, the sheer possibility of what might have burned, was enough to send them scrambling through dusty monasteries and Venetian trading ports, hunting for fragments of the wisdom they believed Alexandria once held. Take Pico della Mirandola, the young prodigy who famously claimed to have mastered every school of thought by age 23. His obsession, the idea that hidden within lost texts was a Prisca theologia, an ancient theology uniting all world wisdom from Egyptian mysteries to Hebrew Kabbalah. He imagined Alexandria as the great vault where these threads once converged, and his dizzying 900 theses, meant to synthesize every known philosophy, were essentially an attempt to rebuild that vault from scratch. When the church condemned his work as heresy, it only fueled the legend. If authorities feared his ideas this much, how much more dangerous were the originals the library had housed? Then there's Marsilio Ficino, the Medici family's star philosopher, who spent his life convinced that Plato and Hermes Trismegistus were two halves of a single divine revelation. Commissioned to translate ancient Greek texts, Ficino didn't just see himself as a scholar, he saw himself as a kind of archaeologist of enlightenment, piecing together a puzzle the library had once solved. His translations of the Hermetica, those mystical texts attributed to Thoth, were based on manuscripts that had narrowly escaped destruction, but to Ficino they were mere crumbs compared to the feast Alexandria might have offered. Every line he decoded felt like stumbling upon a single room in a palace he knew had once held thousands. But here's the twist, the library's greatest influence wasn't just in what it lost, but in how its absence shaped the Renaissance's hunger. Without concrete records, thinkers projected their wildest hopes onto Alexandria's blank silhouette. Was it a repository of pagan science, a sanctuary of interfaith harmony? A trove of magic manuals, the uncertainty made it a mirror for every intellectual obsession. When the humanist scholar Lorenzo Valla debunked the donation of Constantine as a medieval forgery, he proved that critical scrutiny could resurrect buried truths. Suddenly, every lost text seemed recoverable, if only the library hadn't burned. The irony, this frantic search did uncover real treasures, just not the ones they expected. The rediscovery of Lucretius on the nature of things in a German monastery, a poem arguing the universe was made of atoms, sent shockwaves through Europe. But it also deepened the mystery. If this one radical text had survived by chance, what else might have been in Alexandria's stacks? The Renaissance didn't just revive antiquity, it became a seance with scholars like Ficino and Pico acting as mediums, channeling the voices of a past they could never fully hear. And that's the legacy of Alexandria's ghost. It wasn't just a building that burned, it was an idea, one that taught the Renaissance to dream bigger. Because sometimes it's the gaps in history that push us hardest to fill them. The library's true power wasn't in its scrolls, but in the endless what if it left behind a question that still haunts anyone who's ever chased a vanished truth. Beneath the modern streets of Alexandria, a silent hunt is underway, one that could rewrite history. Since the 1990s, teams of archaeologists have combed the city's underworld, wielding ground-penetrating radar and sonar in pursuit of the library's physical remains. The challenge, the ancient quarter where the library stood, now lies buried under centuries of rubble, Ottoman-era buildings, and layers of silt from the Nile's shifting delta. But in 2004, Polish-Egyptian excavators made a staggering claim. Beneath the ruins of the Brushan district, they uncovered what they believed to be 13 lecture halls, each lined with raised platforms, a layout matching ancient descriptions of the library's scholarly pavilions. The discovery sparked fierce debate. Were these truly the echoes of the museum, the library's research wing, or simply another Roman-era academy? The answer remains elusive, but the possibility alone ignites imaginations. Meanwhile, the waters off Alexandria's harbor hide their own secrets. When French marine archaeologist Frank Godiot began mapping the submerged ruins of Cleopatra's palace in the 1990s, his team stumbled upon something unexpected. Colossal stone blocks, statues of pharaohs, and even sphinxes, all lying under 30 feet of murky Mediterranean. Among them were fragments of papyrus, their ink long dissolved but their fibers still intact. Could these be remnants of the library's collection, swept into the sea by earthquakes or tsunamis? The theory gained traction when divers recovered a peculiar artifact, a ceramic jar etched with Greek letters, possibly a storage vessel for scrolls. It's a tantalizing clue, but the harbor's turbulent waters and modern pollution make systematic excavation a nightmare. Still, Godiot's work proves one thing: Alexandria's past isn't gone. It's waiting, half buried in silt and sea. The search isn't limited to Egypt. In 2011, researchers at the University of Leipzig decoded a palimpsest, a medieval prayer book overwritten on erased parchment, and found beneath it fragments of a lost astronomical treatise by Hipparchus, the ancient Greek often called the father of trigonometry. The text had been copied in the 6th century, likely from a scroll salvaged from Alexandria's chaos. Projects like this, using multispectral imaging to resurrect erased texts, offer hope that more of the library's holdings survive than we realize, hiding in plain sight within later manuscripts. Every monastery library or private collection could hold a palimpsest with whispers of the past bleeding through. Then there's the wild card of private collectors. In 2019, a previously unknown fragment of Galen's medical writings surfaced at a New York auction, its provenance tracing back to a Lebanese antiquities dealer. The text contained corrections in Galen's own hand, suggesting it was a working draft, exactly the kind of document scholars would have studied in Alexandria. While black market artifacts pose ethical dilemmas, their existence hints at a shadow archive of texts that escaped the flames, scattered across centuries and continents. The most audacious effort, the modern Bibliotheca Alexandrina, opened in 2002 as a tribute to the ancient library. Its archivists have digitized millions of manuscripts from around the world, creating a virtual repository they call the New Alexandrian Library. Yet for all its ambition, the project underscores a painful truth. We're not just rebuilding a collection. We're reassembling a mindset, a belief that knowledge should be boundless, borderless, and bravely preserved. The real library wasn't just stones and scrolls, it was an idea, and that perhaps is what we're still searching for. 2,000 years after flames consumed the great library of Alexandria, humanity is rebuilding its dream, not with papyrus and marble, but with servers and algorithms. The Internet Archive's digital vaults now hold over 70 million books, films, and web pages, while Google Books has scanned more than 40 million titles, collections that dwarf even Alexandria's legendary 500,000 scrolls. On the surface, these projects seem like the ultimate fulfillment of the Ptolemy's vision. universal knowledge preserved forever, accessible to anyone with a Wi-Fi connection. But dig deeper, and the parallels reveal both triumphs and cautionary tales about our own age of information. Consider the scale. Just as Ptolemy's agents boarded ships to seize books for copying, Google scanners have infiltrated libraries worldwide, digitizing texts page by page. The Internet Archive's Wayback Machine captures entire websites like digital fossils, preserving even ephemeral blog posts and forgotten news articles. These efforts mirror Alexandria's ruthless comprehensiveness, yet unlike the Ptolemies, who hoarded originals, modern archivists champion open access. A student in Mumbai can now read a medieval Persian manuscript from the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, just as Alexandrian scholars once pored over Babylonian astronomy texts. The dream of a single, boundless library is alive again, but this time it's decentralized, a constellation of data nodes rather than one monumental edifice. Yet challenges persist that the ancients would recognize all too well. Legal battles over copyright echo Alexandria's controversies. When Google Books launched, publishers sued, claiming the project was piracy on an industrial scale, much like Athenian merchants who accused the Ptolemies of stealing their literary heritage. Meanwhile, the Internet Archive's emergency library during the COVID-19 pandemic, which lent digitized books without restrictions, sparked debates about who controls knowledge in a crisis. These clashes reveal an eternal tension: preservation versus ownership, the common good versus individual rights. Then there's the fragility of digital immortality. Scrolls burned, but servers crashed too. The Internet Archive's founder Brewster Kahle admits that even their backups could be erased by electromagnetic pulses or cyberattacks. Unlike clay tablets that endure for millennia, hard drives degrade within decades. And while Alexandria's loss was catastrophic, it wasn't total. Fragments survived in quotes and copies. By contrast, a single corrupted database could vaporize entire collections instantly. Modern archivists call this the digital dark age problem. Future historians might find our era's knowledge physically intact but unreadable, trapped in obsolete file formats like flies in amber. Perhaps the most profound difference lies in curation. Alexandria's librarians didn't just collect, they curated, debating which texts deserved preservation. Today's digital archives, for all their scale, often lack that discerning touch. Algorithms prioritize quantity over quality, scanning everything from Shakespeare to spam emails without distinction. The library's scholars would shudder at a world where a TikTok clip and a Talmudic commentary occupy the same algorithmic plane. Knowledge isn't just about accumulation, it's about meaning, context, the connective tissue between ideas. Still, hope flickers in projects like the Long Now Foundation's 10,000-year library or UNESCO Memory of the World Registry protecting irreplaceable manuscripts. These efforts channel Alexandria's spirit by asking not just how to preserve, but what and why. The lesson isn't that we've outgrown the ancient library's mission, it's that we're still learning how to fulfill it. Because the fire never really stops burning, it just changes form: censorship, bit rot, corporate paywalls. And so we keep building, knowing that every archive, whether stone or silicon, is really just a message in a bottle tossed into the future's uncertain tides. Imagine a world where the Library of Alexandria never burned, where its 500,000 scrolls survived intact, passing their wisdom seamlessly from antiquity to the Renaissance and beyond. The sheer weight of that preserved knowledge could have reshaped the trajectory of human progress, catapulting us centuries ahead in science, philosophy, and culture. Think of Galileo, hunched not over handmade telescopes in secret, but studying the precise astronomical charts of Eratosthenes or Hipparchus, their calculations of Earth's circumference and celestial motions already perfected 1,000 years earlier. The scientific revolution might not have been a revolution at all, just the next logical step in an unbroken chain of inquiry stretching back to Alexandria's halls. Medicine would look unrecognizable. Herophilus detailed maps of the nervous system and brain anatomy, if widely known, could have saved medieval Europe from the anatomical Dark Ages. Surgeons might have understood blood circulation long before Harvey, sparing countless lives lost to misguided theories of humors. The library's medical scrolls filled with Egyptian surgical techniques, Babylonian herbal remedies, and Greek diagnostic methods could have fused into a global medical tradition, one where antibiotics weren't discovered in the 20th century, but refined from ancient molds documented by some forgotten Alexandrian apothecary. Philosophy, too, would have fractured into dazzling new directions. Aristotle's lost dialogues, brimming with literary flair and youthful dissent, might have prevented his later works from fossilizing into dogma. Scholars could have traced how his ideas evolved, debating his shifts rather than enshrining them as gospel. Meanwhile, the complete works of pre-Socratic thinkers, Empedocles' elemental forces, Democritus' atomic theories, might have resurfaced during the Enlightenment, offering alternate frameworks for physics and chemistry that bypassed centuries of Aristotelian dead ends. The cultural ripple effects are even more profound. With Homer's lost epics intact, the Western literary canon could have been twice as rich, its heroes more nuanced, its myths more varied. The plays of Sophocles and Euripides, now complete, might have inspired Renaissance dramatists to explore themes beyond tragedy, perhaps birthing genres we can't even imagine. And what of the countless voices erased by history? The library's shelves likely held poems by women like Sappho, political tracts from Persian scholars, or African cosmologies that never made it into the European archive. Their survival would have rewritten the very definition of classic. Yet the most startling change might be psychological. Alexandria's survival would have taught us that knowledge isn't fragile, that civilizations don't have to keep relearning the same lessons. The library's unbroken chain of scholarship could have modeled a world where progress isn't a series of rediscoveries but a steady ascent. No dark ages. No lost sciences, just the cumulative weight of human curiosity, building brick by brick toward the stars. Of course, there's a darker possibility that even intact, the library's treasures might have been hoarded or censored. Would the Catholic Church have tolerated Hermetic magic or Gnostic gospels circulating freely? Would empires have allowed maps of alternate trade routes or treatises on gunpowder to escape their control? The irony is haunting. The library's destruction made it a symbol of universal knowledge, but its survival might have revealed how rarely societies truly embrace that ideal. In the end, Alexandria's ghost lingers not just as a reminder of what was lost, but as a mirror to our own age of information. We've rebuilt its scale with the internet, but have we matched its hunger? It's daring. The library wasn't just a vault, it was a beacon daring humanity to think bigger. And that, perhaps, is the alternate history we still have time to write. The story of the Library of Alexandria isn't just about what was lost, it's about what could have been. Picture a world where we still held Herophilus' anatomical breakthroughs, where Euclid's missing theorems solved problems we're still grappling with today, where the lost plays of Sophocles turned our understanding of tragedy on its head. The library's shelves weren't just lined with scrolls, they were stacked with alternate futures, each one a thread snipped short by flame. What's most haunting isn't the sheer volume of what burned, it's the glimpses we catch in surviving fragments, like shadows moving behind a curtain. The Book of Thoth's promise of immortality, the Gnostic Gospel's rebellious theology, the star maps that may have charted continents unknown, these weren't just ideas. They were portals to ways of thinking we can barely imagine. And yet, in that loss lies a strange kind of magic, because the library's destruction forces us to confront how fragile knowledge really is. We like to think of progress as a straight line, always marching forward, but history isn't a conveyor belt, it's a labyrinth with dead ends and collapsed corridors. The fact that an entire civilization's understanding of medicine could vanish for 1,000 years, That epic poems revered for centuries could dissolve into a handful of quotes is a humbling reminder. Every backup drive, every cloud server, every book on your shelf is just one disaster away from becoming the next Alexandria. But here's the beautiful paradox: the more we learn about what was lost, the more alive the library becomes. Its ghost lingers in every archaeologist's trowel scraping at desert ruins, in every scholar squinting at a palimpsest under ultraviolet light, even in the digital archives racing to preserve our own era's knowledge. The library endures not as a building but as a question: what truths are still out there, buried in plain sight? Maybe a fisherman in Crete has a clay tablet holding Sappho's missing verses. Maybe a monk's diary in a Moldovan monastery contains the key to deciphering a lost Democritus treatise. The hunt continues, and that's the real legacy of Alexandria: an endless curiosity, a refusal to let the shadows win. So tell me, what lost text or mythic secret from the library captivates you the most? Do you dream of finding Aristotle's dialogues, or does the allure of the Hermeticus alchemy pull you in? Drop your theories in the comments below, and if you're hungry for more ancient mysteries, don't forget to explore our other deep dives into history's greatest enigmas. Because the library's greatest lesson isn't about what we've lost, it's about how much is still left to discover.